No, I'll just, like, if someone cares, we can just, okay, the recording is officially started. Sorry everyone for who's watching the recording. I forgot to click the button. We are currently discussing sample limits once more, literal quote. And if you care about the details, look in the document. And back to you, Björn. Sorry.
Okay. I mean, I'm not repeating everything right now, right? We also have the meeting notes. It's just, yeah, Brian.
So the first comment, we decided to add limits on the API level, I think is largely not relevant to this point. I mean, this is within PromQL, and I think you would use this in fairly different ways. I mean, they're sort of related, but I don't think, for instance, I still want limits on the API level.
Yeah. No, it's not meant as a replacement. It's almost orthogonal. Not quite, but partially.
And I really don't like limit ratio. Limit. What are they called? Sample limit as a name. But let's not bike shed the names. I mean, clearly people do want sample limit because they write it as top K.
Yeah.
And they do this on metrics that are known to only ever have the value 1.
Which then the sorting is then very cheap, right?
Well, no. It's a priority queue. Top K1 is relatively cheap, but it's still got to compare. It's still got to linearly scan down every single element and see which one's the biggest.
Yeah. But probably retrieving all those elements is more expensive. And
yes.
I assume the pull request would still retrieve everything, just not look at it. But as I say, we would still have the option in the future to optimize that if the engine can do something like partial retrieves or something, right? But anyway, important now is everyone fine with having this behind the feature flag? And if it's about the name, that can still be discussed in the pull request, right? It's just if somebody now says this is a bad idea, that would be bad if we only learn about it once one has jumped to yet another hoop.
I was also wondering a little bit about the use case for this. If the API limits are a thing which I think are maybe more useful because you can sort of protect against people who are going to misuse PromQL, right? Whereas the PromQL limits seem to be more aimed towards people who should be knowing what they're doing, but they want to be careful about it. But that they need to have the intent to be careful. That's what I'm saying. So if both get in there, then you end up having sort of double functionality, right? Or two ways of doing the same thing. And most people will probably have the API limits in place anyway. Don't know.
So, I mean, to answer part of your question, I definitely see cases where you want to do a join. You need to only have one item on one side of the join. And so you need some way of saying that. Like, I don't care which one. For whatever reason, in my data, I'm getting multiple items. And I really don't want multiple items. I just want one of them.
Oh, that's the use case for that? Or just one of them, I guess?
Well, it's a use case. That's actually the only one I can think of. Are there any in the PR? Sometimes.
They suggest that one of them is to explore the time series. Like to say, I query over a range.
So that one is covered by the API limit. The one where you just want to look at the first 100 elements in your series. But the one where it's inside a join is not.
Okay, but then now I get your comment about the name not being great, but I feel like that's also sort of, again, appropriating a feature for something else a little bit, isn't it? If we still call them sample limits, at least, like the way I understood it.
people definitely write this as top K. You can find
I
that
know.
in the
We do that.
Kubernetes mix-in.
For sure.
And I don't think this is the right meeting to bike shed the name. Whether we want...
I agree, but I think your complaint about the name indicates that either I misunderstood the feature or that's a different feature.
Yep.
It feels like we are missing use cases still. I get the exploration discovery, but I agree with what have been said that current API limit helps with that. So, yeah, not very excited about that. Maybe proposal is needed, like more detailed proposal, but the issue is already kind of big. Yeah.
Okay, so what do we do now?
If nobody else wants, I think having sample, like a way to protect against queries that return a billion samples on the API level is great. I don't really see the point in having this in PromQL, but as to Brian's point, something that makes joins with multiple matches feel more natural would also be great to have. Not sure this is it though.
I mean, the idea about this feature flag experimental functions is that we can put functions in place where we might not be super sure if they're useful and we can play with them. Having said that, I'm playing devil's advocate here. I personally have some concerns that we will then put features into the wild that a bunch of people like for like the wrong reasons. And then it will be very hard to take them away again, even though they are behind the feature flag. Like I see, if you look at the Victoria functions page, it's gazillions of functions. And I hear many people say, this is so great, I have a function for everything. But many Prometheus people would probably say they don't see the learning overhead. Like now, if you get a MatrixQL expression that has paged you, and you see function names you have never heard about because there are 3,000 functions in the language, then you might not like that, right? And I think Prometheus has been traditionally more on this side of let's be judicious. If we make a new built-in function, it needs to be clearly needed, and we don't just put every feature into a function. I'm not trying to judge what is the better approach. It's just that, yeah, I would like to get... What's the general idea? Should we use this feature flag to, in doubt, say yes, and then maybe make people cry if we remove it again? Or should we have essentially now we have to either say, tell Tujuan, please make a better case, write a design doc, whatever, and then we might still reject it? Or we just, with some name bike sharing, merge this behind the feature flag? I mean,
No, makes sense, Bjorn. Just yeah, I wouldn't mind putting this in the feature flag, honestly, because often we see people use it and like it, and in this case, it's not like we see a huge blocker. If we add that would change our PromQL forever. I mean, at least from my point of view, like we could try that. It's like a SQL limit kind of. Yeah, so I would be open for exploration by the community if they want. Just different name, maybe.
Okay, so the consensus would be we'll go ahead with the pull request after some naming discussions, but at least this group wouldn't object to merging this based on the use cases too weak for now, right? That's why it's behind the feature flag, and we would anticipate, after we have gathered some experience, that the outcome might be we remove it after all.
Yeah, I agree. I wanted emoji, sorry.
filling into the essence, and please tell me if I got it wrong. And we are okay with merging this behind an experimental feature flag. Agreed? Anyone disagreeing?
Yeah, I can add the comment on the pull request around the naming. That's enough. That's good.
Oh yeah, the naming. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So if you make the comment, then we don't. We can also make it part of the consensus if you want.
That's fine.
Okay. We do not have a Josh yet, and also we have a bunch of votes which came in less than 24 hours before this call, which is why I didn't see them. Anyway, Callum, Prometheus remote write.
Okay, so just for everybody's context, like a year ago, I did an experiment where I did string interning of all the labels in Prometheus remote write, because by default, essentially for every sample, we duplicate labels. So recently, we've been doing some work to try and finish this off and get it out into an actual Prometheus release. The situation we're in right now is that we've benchmarked a bunch of different possible formats. Originally, I was using like a Golang map and encoding that in protobuf, which is not super efficient. So we've decided on a format. It's in the, I believe, the second link in all those links that I posted. And we're ideally by the end of this week going to make a decision on compression as well. I know compression was kind of a concern, or what if we just do that instead of changing the format kind of question the last time this was brought up. So the short version there is that if we just change compression for the current version of the remote write protocol, we basically have a performance regression. With the amount of duplicated data, compression is just going to take too long to execute if we switch to something like Z standard or something like that, right? With the new format, we have so much less data buffered in the first place via interning that we're still getting better CPU usage, even though in benchmarks, the CPU usage for using Z standard on the new format, for example, is still twice as slow as using Snappy. So I guess what I'm looking for here is whether anyone has strong objections to introducing a new format in general. Amongst those of us that have been working on this, we're kind of at the point that we agree that the format is changing enough that this is probably a 2.0, not a 1.1. Yeah, I think I'll stop there to see if anybody has questions. Gotham, it's using comparable or slightly less CPU. On the receiver, it's definitely using. It's on the receiving side. It's definitely using a lot less CPU from what I've seen. But on the sender, it's using basically the same or less.
And to have kind of additional context, like we discussed this in Berlin, right? And we have the consensus that we want kind of different protocol for sure, but just we weren't sure with what the compression kind of protocols, compression kind of formats we would use, and do we need interning and not. And you know, Callum and the Grafana team did extensive testing and benchmarking that shown that interning is superior, and with even compression, then it gives even better compression. And I separately kind of tested on my end, and it was kind of like super nice as well. Super like better than without interning. So to me personally, I feel like this a little bit kind of like complexity on the protocol is worth it. And I think we end up with kind of nice solution that produces nicely, you know, kind of efficient code. And it's kind of like still readable, because even with interning, there are different kind of ways of doing it, and we settle up with some really reasonable, I think, solution. So yeah, I think today we would love to essentially have final go or no go for interning. And also additionally, I would love to know, yeah, are we happy with 2.0 or should we push 1-1? Anyone has any opinions about that as well? That would be nice to know.
I'm a little concerned about cutting 2.0. The question would be like, how quickly would we be open for a 3.0 if we find a better format?
From my perspective, if somebody's doing the work to make it a 3.0, then I don't have any issue with the timeline. I think you're probably questioning like using Arrow or something, right?
Yep.
Yeah, totally. In fact, I think it would be easier, right? Because what we plan to do, we plan to kind of like clean up our spec to have a proper package path with a style guide. So in the package, you'd have Prometheus remote write .v2. And I think we want to propose also moving Prometheus remote write to be separate than remote read, like it will be different files, different package path. So you could iterate over versions of those in separation. So I don't see any blocker of I don't know, announcing 2.0 and then 1 month later 3.0, right?
So first, version numbers are cheap, and if we are explicit about this needs a 2.x because it is too breaky, but it might be superseded by a 3.0. I don't see a huge issue with this, but there is also a well-established format. If people are concerned about this, we just call it 1.90 or 1.99.0. And just by human convention, everyone will be aware that this is not yet the thing, but it might be the thing. And it's once it is the thing, it's going to have a new major version number. Kind of sucks and kind of has been superseded, but is well established in the industry for a few decades. My main intention in piping up is on book. I don't think we should be stuck on a what number is a good number question.
Yeah, just to be clear, there is a number of other smaller pieces of work that we still need to do to finalize all of this before we would actually ask for people to review it in terms of merging. But the topic amongst us that have been working on it has come up more than once, so I wanted to bring it up here as well. Is this really a 1.1? I would explicitly like to avoid modifying the current format such that we have one giant proto definition that's forwards and backwards compatible. The code path for reading data from the wall and buffering it into one or the other proto formats is already kind of ugly. Having one that supports both is, yeah, I'd like to avoid that essentially.
I think it's possible without performance as well issues, right? Because you would need to send both non-intern strings and intern strings, so that's already a blocker. Yeah, so it's just cleaner to have 2.0. And my point around 1.1 being weird is that protobuf is forward and backward compatible, so it doesn't make sense to have a minor version to me, at least from the protobuf perspective. So just much more clearer to have 2.0.
Yeah, I also think 2.0 makes more sense. And if there's 3.0 1 month later, then that's it. But also, it's not so likely that there is a 3.0 1 month later, because if we follow through with our making Prometheus OpenTelemetry native, we will probably add an OTLP endpoint. And they also are working on an Arrow implementation of OTLP and so forth. And so, yeah, I mean, who knows, right? So now doing 1.1 because we anticipate something, I don't know. I would go with 2.0.
Right?
Brian, you have your hand up.
Yes, I shall talk. I put a PR in. It's not supposed to change anyone's decision. Just for visibility, I have been working on interning the strings inside Prometheus without adding problems, and so that code works now. And so I think once we put the two things together, it'll actually get cheaper to do the sending bit.
Oh, so you're saying that we will intern internally, right? So we could use the same references while sending, kind of an.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Again, this is not the meeting to have interesting design discussions. But certainly for visibility, I highlight it.
I have one final question. So if we do remote write 2.0, it would be the new format, and it would also be metadata changes as well.
Yeah, so everything's listed in the meta issue that I linked in this second paragraph here, but I'll mention them all really quick. So we're doing interning, and that's going to include interning of labels both in samples and exemplars. And then we're also going to include the changes that Pascalis was working on roughly a year ago, which was sending all metadata for the samples that are present in a write request in every write request. So obviously we'll intern the metadata as well. And we want to include the work that has gone into the whole created timestamp stuff recently. Plus potentially offering usage of a different compression algorithm. Those are the things that would go into 1.1 or 2.0, whatever we decide that was.
And if we were to add atomicity, like if you want to send all the buckets of a histogram in the same push, would it be a major change to the format again?
In theory, it's not a change to the format at all for the current format or the new format.
However, we could consider mentioning this as a kind of like protocol, but definitely no change in proto.
In that case, I'm all up for 2.0.
And yeah, I will be looking to kind of like update sharding to do atomicity, but that's on Prometheus side, yeah. In separate thread.
Unfortunately, to support that, or the way we were referring to it was, never mind, I can't remember the name, but we would need to modify how data is written to the wall when we do scrapes in a way that we can know when a scrape started and stopped, and buffer the data until the scrape ends, and then bundle that all together in one write request. There's no mechanism right now for us to know that, and so currently we can't implement transactional remote writes, I think what we were originally calling it.
Cool. Should we do a consensus?
Sure. Okay, let's say that one. Consensus. We are fine with releasing Prometheus Remote Write 2.0 once the last questions are resolved. Having a or 2.x, let's say. Having a 3.x closely after would not be a problem as long as communication is clear. All agreed? Anyone disagreeing? Fabian?
No, I just wanted to hit the wrong button.
Oh,
I agree.
Okay. Then we have consensus. We also still do not have a Josh, but Josh is on call, so I will poke him, but I don't expect him to come.
I mean, we can take the
Yeah,
open
what does-
telemetry.
Yeah, that's the one with the 5 volts. So yeah, what does the
I can give you a quick context. It's
we
actually
have
what?
we have Josh just joined. That's a tongue breaker. So let's close out the API thing, which we've been carrying with us for, and then.
Okay.
So, Josh, the floor is yours.
I'm gonna need a minute to compose myself. I think we're talking about pagination for the APIs, right?
Correct.
All right. I'm looking into document.
Should we go with Fabian's topic and go with yours later, or?
Yeah, you can skip me. I'll go right after this so that I can organize my thoughts and read and everything. Please.
Okay.
Thank you.
So then we have no worries. We are flipping over to Fabian. What does the Prometheus community recommend for open telemetry's instrumentation scope to the Prometheus metrics model?
Exactly. So for those who don't know, OpenTelemetry has something that Prometheus does not have, which is a scope. So scope has a name and optional a version, but the name is always there. And the idea is if you have multiple instrumentations, multiple OpenTelemetry instrumentation libraries, and they produce metrics with the same name, but other conflicting data, it doesn't matter because they live in different instrumentation scopes and it all works, right? And now the issue is, of course, what do you do if you map that to Prometheus? So there is a standard describing the mapping. And so the standard says we add attributes, scope name and scope version to each time series. And then then at least what we can do is if all the metadata matches, like we have two counters with the same name and same help and unit and so forth, we can basically merge them and then they just will end up with different scope names where they are coming from. But this does not work if we want to merge two metrics with the same name but different types or different units or whatever. And so the Prometheus OpenTelemetry community, they asked what we as the Prometheus community would recommend, which I think is a great thing, right? So that we work together, they ask us about our opinion and, are interested. And it will also be interesting for us because as soon as we implement an OTLP endpoint in Prometheus, we need to deal with this ourselves. And yeah, so there are a couple of ideas how to deal with these things. We could allow it completely because as long as the metrics are in different scrapes, it should work. So if we make something like supporting multiple scrapes in a single scrape, so to say, like have an exposition format where you can have multiple scrape responses, we can kind of make one scrape per namespace or something. Or we could just say what's currently the way that this is implemented. If there are any conflicts, the conflicting metrics are dropped. Or we could recommend if there are any conflicts, we just make the scrape fail with HTTP 500 or other ideas. I don't know. But yeah, I think it's cool that they ask for our opinion. We need it anyway if we implement OTLP for Prometheus. So yeah, what do you think is the best solution here? Ben?
Label. Anything, any random metadata that they want to map that isn't part of the metric name itself should be mapped to a label.
And what if you have like conflicts? Like you have
Then you won't. If it's a label, it shouldn't have any conflicts,
But
unless they explicitly make. Like, how can you? If they make a conflict, how can you tell on their side if they've made a conflict?
I mean, they could, for example, have like a histogram named processing time seconds in one scope, and then a gauge named processing time seconds in another scope. That works perfectly fine in OpenTelemetry, but if you just map to labels, it wouldn't work, because in one scrape you cannot have like different types of the same metric name, right?
I was having a conversation earlier today with Bjorn where we were asking ourselves if the type of a city should be part of the city's identity. And Ben removes the glasses. Yeah, but this would solve that problem in particular. But yeah, I don't know.
Honestly, I like the current solution, which is dropping some metrics if there's conflicts. Like, I think the edge case is rare enough that we can get away with it. Why can't you drop?
Because that's a failed scrape. If you have something that you can't parse, we don't partially ingest. We fail.
Scrapes are
As of
atomic.
today, we could change this, but still.
It's all or nothing.
I mean, all I'm saying is from an application perspective, when the application is exposing a metric, we just pick one, help and type and unit. And then if there's a conflict, we just expose that first one or one of those, not all of those.
May I? I was just, I mean, if we
Go
use
for it, yeah.
the raising your hand thing, we also need somebody who calls people. Anyway,
We have the list. If you list the people, you can see the order. Sorry, I thought everyone was choosing this or seeing this.
Oh no, I thought whatever. Whoever brings up the topic calls the people or something.
Okay.
Sorry, I was deliberately not speaking.
Now
I can do
Björn
this in the future. No worries.
We can also all use the list. Anyway, so I assume this is just happening if you run the OTel collector. If you tell the OTel collector to expose a metrics endpoint that is being scraped, right? It's not happening if the
No,
OTel
it's in
collector
the instrumentation as well. So you can have multiple instrumentations in the same application. They come up with similar metrics, maybe the same metrics, but in different scopes.
Yeah, but when does the problem happen?
For example, if you have a Java Spring application that has built-in HTTP metric support, but then you also attach the automatic instrumentation Java agent that also comes with HTTP metrics, then you have duplicate.
Yeah, but OTel puts them into different scope, right?
Yeah.
The problem
they are
happens
scraped in the same scrape then, right? So
the
that's
problem. The problem happens if you expose all those metrics via a metrics endpoint on the OTel collector.
On the application. So every SDK, OTel SDK also comes with a metrics endpoint.
with a Prometheus scrape endpoint, yeah.
Okay, so this scrape endpoint has multiple targets behind it. Is that fair to say?
No. Okay, so just to give you context, like for example, the semantic conventions for DB says there should be db.client.connections.usage. Now, a MySQL library is exposing it and a PostgreSQL library is exposing it. Now, the problem is if PostgreSQL has a different help text to the MySQL library. So which help text do we expose? Or what do we do with the conflict on the help text?
But why are they exposed via the same metrics endpoint? If one is MySQL, one is Post.
It's the
Postgres.
same library inside the same application. It's the client library to talk to MySQL and client library to talk to PostgreSQL.
Okay, but so is there one binary that talks at the same time to a MySQL database and a Postgres database and exposes all those
Why
metrics via the same metrics endpoint?
Why not?
I'm asking if is that happening
Yeah,
or not?
yeah.
I don't know anything about OpenTelemetry. That's the problem.
It could be happening. Is the question? So the question is, what do we do if it happens?
Okay,
The
so
current guidance.
my question. So the fundamental problem is that we are exposing two different targets via the same metrics endpoint.
Yes.
Okay.
Say.
So
But
this
it's
is
not
then
different targets in the same. It's the same service. It's just different parts of the same service.
But in a vanilla Prometheus setup, you would have a MySQL exporter that exposes the MySQL stuff, and you would have a Postgres exporter that exposes Postgres stuff, and ideally for one database instance each, right? That's how you would do it in the Prometheus land.
If I understood correctly, like the idea is like you have the same application instrumented with OpenTelemetry SDKs, and these SDKs producing the same metric name with different scope attributes for different databases. Like imagine that you are writing in Reds for caching and Postgres for something else, and the SDK is producing the same metric. This is kind of possible.
What I'm up to is that this problem only happens if both those metrics with conflicting help text and maybe even conflicting types, the problem only happens if you expose all of them via the same endpoint. You want to scrape them in one scrape.
Yes.
But if they are produced by the same application, shouldn't be these exposed by the same endpoint?
So in the Prometheus world, the Prometheus client libraries would not allow that. The Prometheus client libraries, if you try to register a metric with a conflicting help text, they would say this metric must have a different help text. So it never happens with a native Prometheus metrics endpoint.
Exactly.
But what I'm up to is we know this problem. It has always happened with the push gateway, because the push gateway has exactly the same problem, that you get metrics from very different applications. They all push to the push gateway, and then the push gateway has to put them all together into one valid scrape. And the older push gateways, they had just, once you have pushed conflicting metrics, they have just said, nothing is working here, I'm not exposing anything anymore. Fail fast, right? The next iteration of the push gateway said, I will just not accept a push that leads to this situation. But then, of course, a lot of people were complaining that I have ending my help string on a dot on the one application, and the other help string is exactly the same, it just doesn't have a dot. And so it's rejected, right? Now, the push gateway is a very niche application, and we could usually say, you're anyway abusing the push gateway, you shouldn't even do that, blah, blah, blah. But fundamentally, it's the same problem, right? And the problem isn't the Prometheus data model. The problem is the Prometheus exposition data model, because Prometheus scrapes from different endpoints, and it's totally fine having conflicting help and type strings. That just happens every day, right? So the problem is that we are essentially funneling metrics that belong fundamentally to different endpoints in OTel lingo, as I understand, scopes. We funnel them through the same metrics endpoint, and we need to put them all into one scrape exposition. And the exposition format is inherently forbidding that. So we either change the exposition format, as suggested here, or we have to come up with some other idea, right? But like we cannot put the type and unit and help into, I mean, we could technically put them into a label, but that's not what we want, right? I mean, type, unit, help are modeled as lines in the exposition format. And if we want to stick with that, we need some change, which could also help with the push gateway, right?
So how difficult would it be to refactor the scrape so that multiple scrape responses can be merged into one single scrape.
Yeah, this might, I mean, we kind of need a line like this doesn't end the scrape, it just starts a new scrape. Maybe that's a possibility. This might also help with using open metrics as a dump format, essentially, right? I think we wanted to dump two open metrics, but there were reasons why this wouldn't work, but maybe that was one of the reasons.
You lost me on what specifically didn't work. I mean, I can give the rundown on how we thought about namespaces, because basically the context of OpenTelemetry seems to match onto the namespacing discussion quite well. But I lost you on your last part of the thought, and I presume you wanted Ben or I to jump in.
You mean my last thought?
Yes.
I mean, that was just that if we use open metrics as a dump format, that might help with that, because we can dump. I mean, in Prometheus TS3 we might have this case where we have. I mean, currently we don't really save this properly, but maybe if we do in the future. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, superficially I like the idea of like putting multiple scrapes into one exposition with some marker. Yeah, EOF is meant to be, this is where the scrape is over. But maybe we could abuse it as, this is, if more data comes after EOF, it's a new scrape. But I don't know. I'm not an expert in open metrics.
It's hard to implement. I don't know. I mean, if you know not much about it, everything seems simple, but you know.
Yeah, I think it's hard. I mean, more than 3 hours.
It would also finally break the last straw for our old metadata endpoint, which is by target, assuming that the same target will only ever give you one version of the metadata. And now the same target will give you multiple versions. I mean, it did before, but it was over time. I mean, you could still pretend the second scrape is later, and I only take the metadata from the second scrape for that endpoint. I mean, given the current treatment of metadata in Prometheus, it should be simple. Just what do we do in future with metadata to treat it properly?
So maybe we can split it into two consensus, because the first thing is, without any code change, given the current implementation, what do we recommend? And I understand that our Prometheus philosophy is we don't do partial scrapes. If anything fails, we just fail with HAP 500. So maybe we can do that as a consensus as of now. And then a second one, we intend to explore, you know, multiple scrapes in one scrape format.
I mean, it's still not strictly the same as if you scrape twice after another, because you get completely different series. So with the current code, you would insert staleness marker for all the series in the first scrape that are not in the second scrape. I think it's still a slightly different concept from just having two different scrapes.
I think that if we delimitate these individual scrapes by instrumentation scope, they will all have different scope attributes. So there will be no time series that's in both scrapes. Right?
Yeah. Which means it sounded like marking in the middle of an open metrics exposition, marking something as this is a new scrape. It would be modeled as I have the first scrape, and then a millisecond later, I do the second scrape. But that would mean that all the series in the first scrape now get a staleness marker written because they are uncontained in the second scrape. So it's different from having two scrapes that are separated over time. And from that perspective, it might be problematic by its semantics.
So that would be a second scrape without staleness markers.
Yeah, it's probably more like just. I guess the only thing that it breaks is that metadata is strictly per metric family, aka per metric name. And I never really. I mean, that concept was always weird because the moment you have it all in one TSCB, it's not true anymore. It is only true for a scrape, unless you run into the push gateway situation. Okay, Richie, now you just have to start talking with the new theory.
Just as an in between. So there is no reading. There is no good build reading of open metrics which allow you to use more than one EOF per scrape. But making a change and, for example, introducing an EOS or end of scrape or something, in case an implementation hard relies on EOF, we can just have a different limiter and say this is supposed to be an atomic scrape.
And then we can read the S as scope in case we are not happy with this different scrape semantics and say end of scope.
And onwards to push. No, but I mean we can just call it EOS and be done with it. That's like spec-wise trivial. New revision done.
What is that? Okay, that's a different chat.
I mean, to move forward, shall we first maybe really split it in two consensuses? Because I think the first one seemed to be, except for Gotham's first initial reaction, but I don't know. I mean, if now everyone agrees that in the current implementation, it's best to fail with HTTP 500 rather than having partial drops of metrics and partial succeeding metrics.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, we are talking about like dots or something, but it might also be that we have a metric that is called foobar. And the one help string is foobar is the number of errors that service has thrown in the last hours. And in the other service, the help string for foobar is the number of successes, whatever. It could be a completely opposite meaning, and we would completely forget about that. And we even get the wrong help string attached, right? I mean, that case is also completely valid, and it happens. It's just like it all boils down to, in the end, inside Prometheus, metadata is per series and not per metric family, while the exposition, for historical reasons and for good reasons, is per metric family. And if we want to get multiple of those, let's call them scopes, maybe that's a good name, into the same exposition, we need a construct for that in open metrics.
I'm tentatively okay with 500, but we need to be conscious that it might be a big breaking change. So let's talk to them and see what they think as well.
I mean, what's happening right now if you feed Prometheus an open metrics exposition that has conflicting help lines and type lines?
I think the first one succeeds, the second one is silently dropped.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, if that's the current behavior, we needed to mark it as a bug, but it might meant to It was probably the name of the robustness principle. I don't know.
So it goes a little bit wider because from whatever we consider one self-contained bucket of information, I'm deliberately not saying scrape here. We can say scope, I guess. Every metric family comes once in sequence. So you can't do the thing which you can do in Prometheus exposition format where you start X and then you do Y and then you do a little bit of X again and then you do a little bit of Y again and then a little bit of Z and then X again. You have to do this in proper blocks. And as such, you only have the capability to define a help text once for a specific metric or metric family. And as such, it would actually be a bug if you had more than one within your one scrape, scope, whatever. So even if the current behavior of Prometheus allows it from the perspective of a standard, that would be a bug, and we just need to adopt the standard to allow for it, which is way easier conceptually. And then we can do whatever we want.
Okay, I mean, let's try this EOS thing and see if it works, and make clear that if Prometheus accepts whatever it accepts right now, it's doing this beyond, like, it's not following the standard, it's just tolerating stuff, which, yeah, could be called robustness principle, but maybe it's the opposite.
Can we phrase that as we will try it? Like
yeah, we will experiment with it. Yeah.
I have the feeling that Björn or Brian, I think or in particular Björn, the consensus should probably be drafted by you, because I have the feeling I'm going to, beyond what I already wrote, I'm going to miss nuance.
Okay, let's try. Oh, Brian, you should do it. I'll remove my cursor.
that's fairly simple. Okay, nobody's arguing anymore. Shall we try for a consensus on that? We will experiment.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, go ahead. You can also read it.
We will experiment with an EOS end of scope marker in this text format.
Okay, good.
Awesome. And can we do another one on the, like, do we recommend to never allow partial scrapes but HTTP 500 errors, like, in the meantime?
I mean, I think that's a basic design principle of Prometheus. The question is just, should we tolerate if there's an invalid help string suddenly showing up in the middle of an exposition? Should we then be stricter than we have been so far, if that's really true that Prometheus will accept that?
No. So what happens today is we pick the first one and we silently never export.
Yeah, it's in the exposition they are silent.
Oh, okay, it's not in. So Prometheus. Yeah. So we is the OTel.
Yeah,
OTel
exactly.
code, right?
Yeah,
it's not Prometheus code.
Yeah, so
okay.
Maybe I can type one.
Okay, but then that's an OTel. They have to decide how to deal with that, right? But so OTel is creating valid open metrics or Prometheus text format, just that they decide to drop the conflicting thing.
I don't know if that makes sense.
I mean, then the scrape is okay. So you would then start to not anyone accessing the metrics endpoint would get a 500. That's what the push gateway did, or still is doing. You can disable the checks, right? So the push gateway gives you a 500 if you have pushed inconsistent metrics to it.
I mean, only if it's not a big breaking change. I mean, that is, I think, up to the community. I mean, just because we recommend something doesn't mean they implement it if it's a major breaking change, right? It's just letting them know what would be our recommendation.
I mean, the idea is that we enable that you can actually validly expose all of that. So it would be it's an intermediate thing anyway, right?
Or do we, like Gotham, you sound like your comment reads like, in the meantime, you would just recommend partial drops.
Yes.
I mean, whatever they do now, right?
Yes.
I mean, if we don't have a consensus, if we say it's also okay to partially drop metrics, then that's.
I mean, that's just me, right? Like, and I don't have a strong opinion. I just want to note it down, but I want to see what others think.
I think push gateway tolerated different help strings, but nothing else. But that was already borderline because, as said, right, the help string might actually tell you that these metrics mean something very different. But it would warn you. It would tell you, I've dropped this help string. Fix your metric.
So yeah, if there's no real consensus, we could also leave it out and leave it unspecified because we work on end of scope markers anyway.
To make an implicit point explicit, would any statement be helpful on the OpenTelemetry side to guide behavior to a point where we get more interoperability in the short or long term? Because if that's the intention, we can always just make a statement and put this here or somewhere else to just help align stuff. That mainly goes to Fabian, to some extent to Gotham.
I mean, my understanding is that the standard, or the part of the OpenTelemetry standard that defines mapping OpenTelemetry to Prometheus is about to be finalized. So they have like 3 implementations and like it's almost there. And currently it says dropping the conflicting metrics. So if we think this is a bad idea, it's still time to change it because it's not stable. It's still an experimental standard. We could tell them from our perspective, it would be better to replace this and say, make the scrape fail. But yeah, only if it's even our opinion. So I don't know.
Let me fix it. Consensus. We intend to have better OpenTelemetry compatibility than to simply drop affected metrics or even entire scrapes. Because if we get consensus on this, you can point to this and maybe we can get a few more days of consideration and collaboration. All agreed? Anyone disagreeing?
Yeah, why not?
Need anything else, or should we go to the next topic?
Next topic, I think. Thanks very much.
Josh, introduce a new set of APIs with pagination for consuming alert rule state.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Do people feel like we need to go back to the problem again, or can we jump straight into discussion?
Do a short summary, I would say, and then.
Okay, cool. So basically, the problem here is that when you try to, let's say, query or look at your rules or alerts within the Prometheus UI, if you have more than a certain number, for the sake of argument, I'm going to say 60,000. So I think this is a good number where you start seeing the egregiousness of this problem. Number one, it takes a while for the page to load, even though all the data is in memory. And the experience for the user in order to try and find something, it's not great. This is particularly a problem for us in Grafana, where we do a bunch of things on top of rules and alerts, and our customers experience a very big downtime. So there's two proposals in here, which is 12.320 and 12.120, which aim to add pagination on top of the current existing endpoints, and also propose a redesign of how the information is consumed. Any questions so far, or should I keep talking? Okay.
And this is only for rules, right? Nothing other. This is only for rules API, nothing rules state API, nothing around other APIs, right?
So there's two APIs: is the API v1 alerts and API v1 rules, both for Prometheus. But we're not talking about the alert manager here. The alert manager suffers from the same problem, but that's a separate discussion. I want to keep the conversation scope to just Prometheus right now.
Yeah, but you are not proposing changing Series API or things like that.
No, not at all.
Okay.
Just API v1 rules and API v1 alerts. Yeah. And the problem with what I said about the information being consumed is that if you squint your eyes and look closely enough, you also get alerts from API v1 rules, right? So saying that I'll only paginate the results for API v1 rules is not going to get us there, because you also get the whole payload of all the alerts that are firing from a single rule. So if you have a rule, and such as like, I don't know, it's my target op that's monitoring the op metric, and you're monitoring 120,000 things. If 100,000 of those things go down, you also get an alert for each of those 100,000 things that you're monitoring there. So this is why pagination is not enough, and we're proposing a complete redesign of how you consume the information, which is you first get the group name, and then ideally you click on one of the group names. It'll take you to the list of alerts of that group. You click on the alert of that group, and then you get to see the whole page, and then the whole page is also paginated, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All the details are on the issue itself about the proposal that we're coming forward with. Any questions so far, or do I keep talking?
No, it's good. I guess maybe some compatibility question, but like if somebody doesn't send the page, token, whatever, I guess it gives everything, right? So we could make it compatible. What's your plan for that?
I think I would propose that we spin up B2 instead of B1, just because this is not directly affecting any sort of Prometheus itself, right? So like, it's no harm that you actually just leave the current APIs there. It's not incrementing the load. It's mostly load times from the user perspective. So I think that leaving the existing one as is, to make sure we don't break any sort of functionality on top of that, and just work on top of a new version, would be the best course. Good question, Bartek.
On top of that, like, and do we want to keep the view one for a while and identify who is using view one to deprecate in some time?
I think so. I think with 3 coming up, and I hope we can get to this work before 3, hopefully. Maybe 3 would be a good time to maybe at least Market has deprecated and be moving a couple of versions from there.
Yeah, there is no way you can remove the V1. It won't work. Prometheus is too much integrated in deep system in big company. There is no way you can remove V1 just like that.
Okay.
If you don't add the pagination directly on the V1, it will be impossible to drop. And I think Bartek suggests that you add the query parameter V1 directly on the API, and if you don't provide the query parameter, it just returns everything like today. I think it's a good call because then the UI can be adapted immediately, and if you need the pagination for TLI robotic purpose, then you will want to migrate. But if you are not into that and you are consuming the UI, the API for UI purpose, you won't see that, and you won't see it if you are exactly like you said. You don't have 60,000 alerts or rules, or so. For people that are not in this use case, they won't migrate because they don't see the problem. So if you are going to drop the V1 because you want a V2, you will break everyone that doesn't have this use case, which is maybe a lot.
So it's important that we talk about two things because of that. Thank you, Agustin. I think that you make a very good point here. The problem with pagination not being enough, it's the case that I just described, right? Because, for example, for rules, where you can have a bunch of alerts be displayed as part of a rule, even if I paginate to just show me one rule, if that's the rule that has 150,000 alerts, you're still going to incur in quite a big loading time, regardless of how many alert rules you have.
Yeah. That's totally true, and I cannot argue against that. But there is a
and then we need to talk about
how much do we know. I mean, if you are going just to provide a pagination on the rules, just only on the rules, how do we already know it won't work at all? Because we already have some use case that you have 60,000 alert rule on a group already, or something like that.
Yeah, so that's kind of the problem, right? It's like you can never know, and if you want to solve the problem holistically, I think the format needs to change. But that being said, right, like it's important that we talked about how will it break for our users, right? Because like the plan for the front end, where you actually go into Prometheus and you go into API B1 rules, and it'll show you the screen that you currently see, where you can see the rules divided and all that. It's like we control that, right? So we'll be able to tell, hey, we need to change the experience to B1, or you can stay on the same experience that you have right now using B2, sorry. And we can control how people consume that information. However, if you're accessing the APIs directly, and if we have other systems that are accessing the API directly, right, then, as I said before, they can continue to use B1 and we cannot deprecate it. But adding pagination to B1 only is not going to solve the problem, which is why I'm proposing a whole new set of APIs, even regardless of whenever we deprecate B1 or not.
Okay. Got it.
So it's important that what I'm saying is important that we separate the two things, right? So one thing is whenever we deprecate B1 or not, and the other thing is whenever we can whenever we need B2, or we can build B2 on top of V1. And I don't think we can build B2 on top of V1 without any breaking change, because this is just not about pagination. It's also about changing the return format.
Okay, you want to return the response. You want to change the response format.
Yeah.
So you don't want to expose anymore the YAML format. Well, it's a JSON, but I mean it's you don't want to expose the
current
rules format.
The current APIs return JSON. Because I'm not talking about the configuration APIs that Mini or Panos or Cortex has. This is about the Prometheus APIs specifically.
Okay.
And those return JSON right now.
So what do you want to change exactly? Sorry, like you changed it to what? You add new fields, you add a different structure, different format?
New fields, different structure, new format. It all described in the issue. I can share my screen and we can go through it if you think it's worth it. Yeah. But it's all described in the issue what type of format we're proposing right now.
You don't want to expose any more JSON format? I mean, it's the easiest way to consume from the... Okay.
We continue to be JSON. Sorry,
Okay,
Simon, you wanted to say something?
No, just out of curiosity, can't it be like a new endpoint under the V1?
You're very silent. Can you up your volume a little bit?
Yeah, sorry. Can't it be a new endpoint under the /API v1? Why?
Could we? Yeah, we can continue to use the API v1 and it can be a new endpoint, certainly.
That could accommodate, like, we don't need a brand new V2 API, but we can just let people use the old endpoint if they want, and then...
Especially if you are going to change the format expose, maybe it makes sense to have a new brand name, let's say. Because if you say V2 rules, we are probably expecting to have more or less the same format, maybe not exactly, but something equivalent. And if you're going to change everything, it won't be exactly a rules, let's say. Something different.
I'm with Agustin on this one, right? It's like, to me, I think the question that we might face from the community is like, yeah, but why do we have two endpoints in the same API that do kind of the same thing, right?
Okay.
Yeah. Which is why I think B2 is a better idea than putting it into B1. But I don't have a strong opinion. I think whenever we want it in B1 or we want it in B2, I'm flexible on that.
Yeah, quick question. I didn't went through the issue yet, but could be an idea, provide some content negotiation to reply on YAML, for example, would be useful in some use cases.
Why YAML for this use case?
Like if people is building UI, maybe they may leverage this a bit, like user by default is JSON, but we can send the content negotiation and people avoid transformation on their side. Since we already have all the structures, all the things on Prometheus side, like sterilize these different content types should not be.
I will keep the JSON format because it's quite straightforward. It's quite. I mean, in the industry, JSON is the base format to communicate between services, and YAML is not. I experienced that when I was doing some HTTP API. Exposing YAML is exposing you to provide some new header, which is not at all defined in the industry. So you have nothing to say you want to YAML. So you are more or less copying what JSON is doing, but it's not specified. And actually, if it's just for UI purpose, the UI can transform a JSON in YAML in a quite easy way, because you are transforming your JSON in TypeScript structure, and then you go back to YAML, and that's it. So if it's just for exposing purpose, I will not recommend that.
I'm with Agustin in this one. It's like in Cortex, we made the decision to use YAML for APIs because there was a dream where you could do something with the YAML format. And in this case, it was you could pick up your YAML file in which you use for your rules in Prometheus, and you can shoot it over the API in order to have the same file be reused multiple times. So I think for cases like that, reusing the YAML format did make sense. But in Prometheus, I don't see how could that be valuable, having the additional.
Yeah, just to share, maybe I was clear. The idea was not reply YAML as default, like it's provide the ability to negotiate the content exposed.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
but I'm convinced about the
You would like to support YAML format, but probably for robotic usage, and if it's done that way, you are going to code something, and the code can support YAML and transform it in JSON, and then communicate to the API in JSON, and retransform it in YAML. But it doesn't worth it to support YAML natively on HTTP from my perspective. And also, it's not super great with compression. Just because it's hard to compress. YAML is hard to compress.
So I agree. I think I'm hearing that we want to stick with YAML and we don't want to support any sort of content negotiation for now. Going once.
So, yeah, go ahead.
Exactly that. I think you and I have the same idea.
Yeah. So let's try for a call for consensus for we are fine with a V2, and then you can do whatever within the V2, like not what you know what I mean.
And just by curiosity, do you want that for Prometheus V3?
Hard to say right now. I'm gonna wait until January. I think we're aiming for March for KubeCon EU still. Prometheus V3. Yeah, hard to say whenever we're gonna get it in time. Hopefully we do, but I'll know more early January.
Okay.
To be clear, do you mean you're not certain if you can make it to KubeCon or by KubeCon, or do you mean you don't
By
know if you
KubeCon.
can wait long enough?
I don't know if we can make it by KubeCon, implement the functionality to be ready for V3.
Okay.
Hopefully I'll see you there.
Okay. Consensus. We are okay with introducing a V2 of the endpoint of the API endpoint. Agreed? Anyone disagreeing?
Yeah, agree.
Sounds good. I also realized we have been going at this for 1.5 hours, and I have been told humans need bio breaks. As such, should we do a short bio break, or should we march on because we only have half an hour left anyway?
Well,
And we just end 10 minutes early.
let's continue.
Huh? BBB for best. Bartik, Ben, and Bjorn. Make routes for different endpoints configurable in Exporter Toolkit, including switching them off.
Yeah, I think Bartek and Ben had very strong opinions on this, and I thought we don't need this. I just found it fair to put it here because it has been discussed. Ben and Bartek, are you still here?
Yeah, sure, I can explain. So generally, maybe the name roots is weird. So essentially, we have this convention in Prometheus and our binaries generally to give, those debug endpoints. So, every binary has some metric endpoint / metrics, and every binary has the pprof endpoints, right? Which allows you to pull profiles, goal line profiles about, memory, CPU usage, and so on. Now, this is accompanied together, usually within the same port, together with other endpoints that the server might give. For example, in Prometheus, you have public-facing APIs, let's say, like query, like labels, alerts, UI, all of this together on the same port with metrics. And I believe this is the same for Ad Manager and really any server that we have. By default, this is like that. Now, this is problematic if someone would like to have expose the query of the Prometheus itself outside, maybe behind some engines, behind some authorization, but they don't want maybe the same user that has access to the query, to the PromQL, to have access to the internal endpoints and learn more about maybe Prometheus performance. But actually from profiles, you can get more, like you can get even more information about the traffic, about what path of your code is actually executed more often. And actually you can do DDoS as well through the pprof, right? You can just spam the pprof and essentially kill Prometheus server. So we got some issues, and there were some, I guess, researchers or some kind of like people who submitted issues around that to split, especially profiling to separate port, right? And this is beautiful because it's just then easier to kind of like close this port. For example, when you use Kubernetes, use this port, expose only one port through your services, through your load balancers to users, and not expose the service port, admin port. Some projects use that notion, and I think it's a fair kind of task. Imagine you would like to do the same with one port. That's kind of non-trivial. You have to have some specific engines that you might filter some paths for some users. So generally, having two ports is a solid idea, and I guess the proposal here or discussion here would be: do we want to support that? Do we want to have some optionality, or maybe from 3.0 we always split into two endpoints, two essentially ports, listening on two ports? What do you think? What's the opinion of the room?
I think it's not only the pprof endpoints, but also like the web admin, reload, quit.
Yeah, and metrics, to be honest.
And we already have open PRs for this, I think.
I mean, the admin API already has a CLI flag, right?
Have a what? Sorry?
A CLI flag. We have -- web enable admin API or -- no web enable admin API.
But that disables everything. It doesn't allow admins to have a separate routes to separate things. Yeah, generally, as a user didn't need it that too much, but people, just safer for users by default to do this. We could research more what projects are doing this, what not. I don't remember, but I think Envoy is doing this separate, or there were some projects who have separate ports for admin stuff. So just feeling of the room. Do we have energy for this? Would we accept PR? Would we want? I believe it's fine to put that as a flag and just, hey, if you set this flag on Prometheus, we give you two ports. By default, you have one as usual. And putting that into exporter toolkit, so other binaries can reuse the same model. I think that's great.
I'm in favor, as long as we don't allow every single endpoint a new port.
Yeah. So I would propose admin endpoint feature, let's say, and put their /metrics, put their pprofs, put their reload, and those kind of special paths that might need admin access.
Quick question, do we want to have Prometheus admin API over this separation as well, since we are talking about admin paths?
Yes.
Or not really? Yes? Maybe I missed some part.
I missed your question. Sorry. Do we want what?
Yeah, I mean, my question is like we are moving this like matrix bprof and like allow this running on different ports, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. My question is like, if this is the intention for this is like provide some admin ports like we have on Envoy or East or something like that. Do we want to have Prometheus admin API running different ports as well from the non-admin API?
Yeah, that's what we discussed. Yes, I mean that's that's one option of doing this, is to kind of put those admin APIs, what we have behind some flag, into separate port as well, and treat them as an admin essentially. Yeah. So
okay. Yeah, I guess I missed this start. So okay, yeah, fine, thanks.
But if you are putting this endpoint under the admin flag, that means we can deactivate it. Well, it's not activate by default. It's okay. I think it's quite weird. It's not activated, but maybe I'm certainly missing something.
yeah, I don't remember if web admin is by default on or off. I don't want to change this. I think I want to change other flag. I mean, I would see another flag, admin endpoint port, and if somebody specified that, we put everything into the separate port, and we still respect this flag web admin turn off or on, despite whatever split port or one port API you use.
All right. Sorry.
Does it then maybe make sense to explicitly define what's considered like a privileged endpoint, basically, and then provide flags for that?
Yeah, admin privilege. That's the same to me. Yeah. Okay, I see no objection for optional feature like that. So to support the discussion, I think we are open for contributions like that. And I don't know, I think we are ready for consensus.
Okay. Consensus. Maybe. Reaction. Okay. Wait, sorry, I'm wrong. So regate on a design document, or just say we are fine doing it?
We are open to have separate port for privileged functions optionally, something like that.
Consensus. We are open to this and look forward to reviewing a PR.
Yeah.
All agreed? Anyone disagreeing? Okay. I'm going to put 2 point. No. Let me mentally restart. We might not have the time to completely finish another topic in 13 minutes. As such, 2 things before we go further. People in this call who are not Prometheus team members yet, in particular ones who join often, if there's ways where we can try and support you towards a path, maybe also try and kick your employer and try and encourage your employer to give you more work time to contribute. Things like these, if anything, do reach out and do let us know, because by the simple fact of you joining once more, and some even very often, if you want it, we should and will happily support you. The other thing, should we have a Dev Summit next month? Because if we are going to go for one, we will probably not be doing the last week of the month. And as such, it would be the 21st of December.
So I kind of announced we are not doing this in email.
Oh yeah, fair. Yeah, fair. Okay, yeah.
Sorry.
True. Yeah, true. So yeah. Next time don't. But yeah, fair. You even poked me about it. I also didn't fully.
And I got approval from Bjorn at least. Anyway, let's not. I mean, I think we wanted to do it anyway. Just going back to the 3.0 idea, like, so do we have some agreement when we do this?
You mean when we delivered or when we start to work on that?
Because we thought about KubeCon and then maybe not, maybe yes. Another topic. Sorry.
That effort is well underway, as far as I'm aware, and being on the sort of team who keeps track of that.
Dawson can probably give us a good overview, but unless I'm very mistaken, at least a few of us are aiming towards the state. Maybe not the ones who broke charters of other team members, but...
I mean, Jan is on the coordination team, right? Gotham, you too?
Yes.
Yeah, so we have a bunch of people who are in charge.
Let's say we are aiming for the date, but I don't think it's a given. And I'm not very keen on doing it if we don't have a keynote slot.
Yeah. And it seems we don't have, right, Richie?
I talked to Nikita during the, and not only her, to a bunch of others during KubeCon, and my last status is KubeCon chairs will reconsider, both on, I mean, the super short version is let me restart. I strongly disagree with, in particular, keynotes being largely product and other centric things and not also about the thing which actually makes CNCF successful, and these are the projects. As such, I do and continue to argue robustly in favor of having more project news during the most important bits and pieces of the most important avenues which we have as a wider community.
That would be great, because I like so yeah, please keep doing that, Richie. That would be awesome to have technical stuff during the keynote.
I caught only half of this. Did you say it's cheap doing this?
No, it's I said, oh sorry, I said please keep doing that, because I dislike the keynote because it's all about clients and blah 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 and bullshit, and we don't have any news about the actual project. So well, it was just a supportive message. Please read it. Thank you for doing it.
I will certainly not shut up about this topic if I continue to be voted into the governing board. And even if not, I will certainly not shut up about all of this. I did not get any reply. I am in a thread with Nikita on something else anyway, so I can also poke her about this. I also believe Gautam wanted to talk to her, but I'm not quite certain. But also, to be fair, it's not only her. There's more than a single KubeCon chair. Josh?
When will we make the decision, final one, about whether we're going ahead with B3 and KubeCon or not?
How about early January?
Sounds good. Yeah.
We could actually put this onto the agenda of the Dev Summit for January already.
Yeah, that sounds like a good call.
Okay. Then I'll add this to, I'll just create the thing. Yes, fair. Okay, good. So yeah, let's not mesh stuff into the last 7 minutes of the call, which ends 10 minutes early because we didn't have a break. So everyone gets 6 minutes of their day back. Do something nice. Hug your family. See you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks.
Lovely seeing
Bye.
you. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Nice one.